My name is Leah Sperduto. I work with the city of Eagan. I am going to share some of the tools that we use with our GIS data. Some of you may be familiar with Power Automate. We use several automation tools with our workflows, Power Automate, Make, and some others. So I am going to see if I can share my screen. And bear with me. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Great. Interrupt me if you need me to stop, or there is, I of course cannot get my presentation to start. Okay, you can all see this. All right, so for Eagan, and actually I am going to turn off my camera because I'm getting, okay. So for Eagan, GIS helps with many aspects of our city workflows, from department coordination, project management, to improving communication to our residents and internally. We've recently been able to use some of the automation tools not directly embedded into GIS software, and it's been useful in removing some of the repetitive actions that we need to have happen and to streamline some of those workflows. So I'll step through some of the workflows we have and how we've implemented some of these tools to kind of communicate that. But I have the PowerPoint slides. If there's time at the end, I can go through and do some demos, but I'm hoping I capture everything here. In addition to some of the out-of-the-box reporting tools and applications available from GIS and Esri, we use other tools that are available through our government-issued Microsoft Office license, like Power Automate, formerly known as Flow, and sometimes looks like make.gov.powerautomate, not to be confused with Make, formerly known as Integramat. But we also use Power Query Editor from Microsoft Excel to replicate some very specific reporting needs. And then we use Power BI with Power Automate and Excel with Access to assist with some unique integration needs that we have. And then Metabase, which is a free open source software, which has been helpful in a lot of our reporting needs and communication efforts when GIS is our primary driver for a specific workflow. So in Eagan, the first example here I'll give is we have for water customers, they can apply for rebates when they purchase WaterSense or Energy Star qualified appliances. And so customers can apply for their rebate by filling out a Survey 123 form from the city's website. And then once they fill out their information about the qualifying purchase and the property information, which includes their email address, after the survey is submitted, it triggers a Power Automate request to send an email to the applicant. And Power Automate has been pretty easy to configure with Survey 123. It has a lot of built-in intuitive connectors to the surveys, including the list of surveys once you make the connection to your ArcGIS Online account, which happens right in Power Automate. And then based on the survey question answers that the applicant gives in the survey, they're able to easily incorporate that into the email when it goes out to the recipient. Once the Power Automate workflow is established and saved, it's automatically configured to the Survey 123 form settings. So in Survey 123 in ArcGIS Online, that's automatically added to the webhooks configuration of the survey. So this has provided us with easy to configure methods to complement workflows and improve communication that really is primarily happening in the GIS software. So this has been an additional tool that's been helpful. Like a lot of you may use. We use a common GIS layer to track our incoming requests. And these requests have a typical workflow from initiation to completion, where we have to take in the request, it's triaged at some point, and then communication needs to happen or work needs to be assigned. And then afterwards, the work is closed or something happens to complete the request. So we're using Power Automate and Make to help with this workflow, using webhooks to trigger emails, reports, and auto-filling data. So I'll step through some of those examples. Some of our requests come in from the public and they're initiated from our public-facing survey. Many of these are simply triaged to a dashboard or other field applications for follow-up response. But similar to the water conservation rebate, we have leveraged the Power Automate application to trigger an email to the requester. And for those internal groups we have at the city that have opted not to use a geospatial component or the Esri dashboards to manage incoming requests, they've just preferred to have an email. So an email is also sent to the city personnel with all the pertinent information they need to follow through and respond to the customer. So some of the requests that come in are managed through dashboards and may be reassigned to work in the field. So we maintain that same request that came in and, and have it delivered to the appropriate field crews via Survey 123 or Quick Capture. So I'll step through how we use Make, which is formerly Integromat, but our field crews use Quick Capture to identify some locations out in the field where potential work needs might need to happen. If they see a pothole or a tree that needs trimmed, we use Quick Capture to allow them to have a tool that they can use for quick, easy to use, large buttons, and get the data entry that we need in order to make sure it's triaged accordingly. And it's worked well on our field staff devices, which are phones, and we don't have as much real estate to work with. It's been pretty easy to configure out of the box and have buttons set up to be auto-populated with the desired values we want. The balance with Quick Capture data entry is that you need to be selective in what you have them manually enter, if anything. So the address is something that has become very important when collecting these points, and addresses can sometimes be time consuming to type in. We've been able to implement a webhook in Make to facilitate in populating that nearest address or the intersecting address. And that way it's populated right into the data that they're creating in the field. The configuration for it is very similar to a lot of the tools in Power Automate, and it easily connects to your ArcGIS Online account to access your Quick Capture application if you already have one running. And then the triggers are also set similarly, where the values from the services can easily be identified to populate your webhooks. And even some of the JSON is used to reference, in this case, we use the Esri World Geocoder directly to leverage whatever address is nearby or intersecting. And then once the scenario or webhook is saved, it will update the Quick Capture application in ArcGIS Online, similar to how it worked in Survey 123 with Power Automate. And when that button is pushed, the nearest address is populated automatically. So that's been pretty useful. We have had a lot of trials and tribulations trying to get this one to work, but it worked with the help of Survey 123 staff and GitHub and working through some of it, but it's actually pretty slick once it's in place. So Metabase. We now use a suite of Esri applications and GIS data to manage our plow events, our driver assignments, and after storm reporting, which used to be done on paper. The field supervisor assigns drivers to their routes via Survey 123 form following route completion, and then drivers complete an after storm report using a form in a dashboard that we have set up or on their phone. The dashboards are helpful because the managers are able to track the status of entry and materials used. So in lieu of the managers needing to track down the field staff to let them know they need their entries done, it was a little bit different on paper. We needed a way to let them know if they needed their reports filled out. So we use a software called Metabase to provide daily email notifications to staff and managers of outstanding plow reports that are needed. It's a free open source software. I think they offer a pay-as-you-go and an enterprise option, depending on what you need. But it's out of the box. It's pretty easy to configure. We have needed some help from those that know SQL and some of the tools that are a little bit more helpful to use, but it's been really useful to get us what we need. But yeah, it connects to the GIS data through our SQL database query, and it goes out and looks for those assignment records where the end date is null and it needs to be filled out. So it's helped them a lot in filling out their time. And it's pretty intuitive. I guess filling it out is something that's been pretty easy to keep up with. We've been able to kind of customize the reports if we need something specifically for a specific driver. And then also link them back to the website or the survey so that they can do whatever data entry they need to do. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Power Query Editor. We have used this in some of our workflows. GIS has been useful in offering out-of-the-box options for reporting needs, or we've been able to put together dashboards for people to use so they can digest some of the information from GIS. And we have been using GIS for project management for some time now, but it was driven by information that was always housed in a spreadsheet, specifically an Excel spreadsheet that was maintained and intended for complete printability sake. It was used daily in the field and in the office and was updated weekly by someone and then emailed out. It required a lot of effort, though, to sync those projects between GIS and the records in the spreadsheet, and it was hard to make any relationships. It was purely for the visual sake of it, and the calendar part of it. I don't know if you can see this calendar part of the table was kind of a critical part because that was what they needed in order to make sure they were seeing what they needed and it was scheduled out according to their needs. And I bet 20 plus people were using it very regularly. So we were in a situation where in order to truly adopt GIS as the project management source for the data and get the buy-in we needed from staff, we needed a spreadsheet that had been used for decades in a very particular format to be replicated from the GIS source data. And the nice thing about Power Query Editor is that you can have many different formats as your data source, including SQL, and it provided a lot of flexibility for manipulating the format of the data while still providing accurate and up-to-date information. And the look and feel of the original matrix was there. So once the data was created, we were in GIS, it's updated, maintained through GIS. We use a series of surveys and dashboards to let the staff do the updates they need. And we use Power Query Editor to draw the data out from SQL and replicate a report output that they were familiar with. So slowly, the staff have become more comfortable navigating the same information in the dashboard, but a lot of times staff still prefer this paper version. And the other benefit here is that the data entry used to occur in multiple locations and be duplicate efforts in a lot of different places. So syncing the information was really difficult. So now everything is entered into one source and into GIS. So it's been flexible. Sometimes with workflows that require integration, we need more from the reporting than what GIS alone has had to offer. We've also used Power Query Editor to draw out data from an Access database called Planet, which our finance department uses for hosting the city's capital improvement financial records. Because we use GIS to map the public works CIP projects, we need to be able to reliably import and sync the data from Access into GIS and update some of that GIS data based on those records on a semi-regular basis. We did look at doing a more direct connection from ArcGIS to Access, and there were a lot of hurdles, some of which were unique to the configuration of this database from the vendor, the Access database. And due to some of the limitations where Power Automate doesn't interact with Excel, Power Query Editor, Power BI allowed us to update a data source and make it available to Power Automate to harness for models in ArcGIS. So with the Power Automate tools, we are setting a recurrence or a refreshing setup where the data set is running a query from Power BI and then creating a CSV file. Sorry, my slides are a little bit behind here. And eventually it overwrites an existing file in SharePoint. And from there, we've been able to harvest that CSV file and work it into our data models. And then ultimately, this is available from our interactive map for review for managers during the drafting and review process of the CIP. So I should also mention, this is kind of a bonkers process if you look at it. There may be a lot more streamlined way of doing something like this, but with the tools we have with our Microsoft government license and limited funding, this has become a functional and cost-effective way to manage and move data by GIS staff and even some of those that are not necessarily fully on the technical side of the data. So yeah, so I guess from here, I have a lot of this information up. I can share how it looks in some of the actual programs that are out there. Are there any questions, or does anybody want to see anything? Friday afternoon, does everybody just want to be done?
No, I think that would be greatly. I had a couple of questions, and I mean, first of all, thank you, of course, for sharing this information. And yeah, as far as that last visual, I'm sure we all have our flow charts of all of these things that we've cobbled together because of licensing or because one of our departments is using a specific tool that makes it really hard to get data out. So that's all too familiar to see.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had I mean, some of it too has been where it seems like there are opportunities to use Power Automate, but with the limited tools available with our government license, we've been left with we've been left looking for something else in most cases, rather than looking at extending that license. So I think sometimes it's even hard for us to justify it if we don't necessarily know if it's going to completely do the job for us.
Yeah.
So that's where we've kind of gone out and tried to leverage some of the other tools that are out there But
Yep. Cool. And I just had one other
yeah,
question for now, and then I might have a couple more after you do some demos too. But I think one thing that might be helpful for context, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but roughly how long do you think you, as well as the city of Egan's, been using Power Automate and using kind of more of these
yeah,
secondary and tertiary tools to enhance your GIS work?
yeah, that is a great question. I would say probably for at least 5 years.
Okay.
I mean, I'm thinking we've definitely there's a lot more examples I could show. Most of these have been in place for a while.
Hmm.
And it's, and it really doesn't stop here. We actually, with some of our workflows, it's not just this, you know, this flow that we're using. There might be another one involved separately. But
Yep.
I guess I would say about 5 years, because that's when the city really adopted SharePoint and we felt like we could kind of dive into it. But also I think it was part of the evolution of some of the Esri tools
Hmm.
and kind of piqued our interest when they started to open up some of the connectors,
Yeah, sure.
quick capture and some of those, and it became a little bit easier to adopt.
Yep. That makes sense. Cool. Well, I'll stop with, if anybody else has questions, please feel free to chime in. But otherwise, yeah, if you had any additional demos you wanted to show, Leah, that would be great to see.
Yeah, so I will say, I know with Make, you are allowed, I think, 2 scenarios to run to be on at any given moment with the free version. If you want to go beyond that, you have to purchase whatever their lowest level purchasing cost is. And we have done that because we have been using this more. There's also some tools we found that, like, we're able to produce with our license of Power Automate. We've been able to do things like add attachments to the emails that we're sending out. But only using Make. Like, we're limited to what we can do with our license unless we're using Make. Power Automate seems to kind of have these little hurdles that come up, and we don't necessarily know until we're in the midst of trying to implement it. So that I would say is one of the biggest challenges of these. But Robin couldn't be here today. Robin Drucker is our asset management coordinator, and she has been tasked with kind of providing some of these reporting tools from the data we use. So she's been really, really helpful in just being able to dedicate some time to figuring out some of this stuff. And I don't know, she's been a real wizard with all of it. So it's been really helpful. But she's really been able to break down how some of this works and really leverage it to work with what we need. But I don't know if there's anything anybody wants to see in particular. There's Metabase. That one has been really helpful. Let me see if I can find one that has an open plow report here. Yeah, I'll look for this one. Yeah. So here's a record, probably because they're still out doing some of this, so it would be open, but we're able to provide links to things. It is a lot of what you see is what you get, so that's been helpful. It's not difficult to configure these, and it opens it up and brings them right to where they need to be. Yeah.
Very cool.
Cool.
What I know 5 years is a long time, so this is probably a tricky question, but if you could think like earlier on, because I know, so like we use Power Automate here, and I can't honestly even answer this myself, but what how did you get started with this? For maybe people who have been wanting to do this, like
Oh
like
gosh. I
Or maybe
don't,
like
that's a great
maybe like what are some of
question.
the first things you started doing? Because this is really awesome to see, but
Yeah.
we've all seen demos and like we all want to get to where this is, but as we all know, that also takes years. So what were the things, or maybe even just the
You
things you do
know,
today that are like these are still really quick wins that we can do and they're relatively simple to set up?
that's a great question. And now that I really have to think about it, I kind of pulled that number out of, I don't know if it was 5 years ago, but I would say it was at least 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
But I can't remember the first one we did now. I think actually Metabase was the first thing we implemented, and that was before we had Power Automate, or before we felt like we could use Power Automate, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, and this sort of opened up Pandora's box of, we had started using it because we wanted to just send out emails in one of our workflows.
Hmm.
Um, one of the ways we've used it is to send out emails if a specific, it's sort of like the trigger, if there's a trigger in the database. And that was something that I still feel like we struggle with Power Automate. I don't know if
Hmm.
anybody else has experienced that, where if there's a trigger in a SQL database to be able to send an email. Um, I think with some of the Arc Pro tools, some of that is going to become maybe a little bit easier, and
Hmm.
um, but not being fully into Pro yet. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what our first tools were that we used. I would say some of the easier tools to implement though were using Power Automate with Survey 123. There's a lot
Yep.
of um, tools that are just easy to connect to. Like I look here, there's just this add new connection. It's very familiar, and then from there you start to see some of the other connectors that are out there,
Yep.
and it's, I don't know, it's a little bit easier to feel comfortable trying new things.